they make it through? Only time will tell. And that time is just about now. We are getting ready to start the games at the top of the hour. And we will have 4 games going on simultaneously. And I will do my best to keep us up to date on all of those games at the same time. So I want to invite chat now to make their predictions. Who do you think, looking at this bracket, who do you think will make it through to the semifinal and then on to the final to be played tomorrow? That is the big question right now. So I'm being told that the games will be starting very soon. And we're going to be going through the prices for this qualifying event. And everyone who made it this far has won a prize, $200 to the losers of the quarterfinals, $350 to the loser of semifinals. And then, of course, the big prize is that you make it through to the in-person final in Reykjavik, which is the first prize, together with $500 and a $500 consolation prize also for the poor person, making it almost all the way through, but stumbling in the end. And with that, we are joining the games. And here we have Alexander Donchenko with the white pieces. He was rather fortunate to make it through to this quarterfinal. He had a losing position in the final round yesterday. And that losing position arose because he was unfamiliar with the Fischer Random castling rules and how to properly execute the castling in Fischer Random. But he fought back from a very, very tricky situation, and he made it through here to play Alexei Sarana, fielding the black pieces in this first game. And as we will see here, we can notice that the queens are rather far out to the side. That's an important feature of the position. The bishop on the side of the board is actually pretty decent because bishops on the side point towards the middle, which is a very special feature about the bishops, because this other bishop, even though it's standing in the center of the board, it's actually pointing out towards the edge. And normally you want your pieces pointing in towards the middle. So this corner bishop, in reality, is just as good, if not better, than the bishop in the center. It's very uncommon for the rooks to be placed this kind of far out on one side with the king in that same area. And that means in order now to castle queenside, the white king will go all the way to where the white knight is, and the white rook will go where the bishop is. So if either player tries to make a queenside castling from this starting position, we will have the very rare scenario that both pieces go in the same direction, whereas normally the king would go in one direction and the rook come across on the other side. And as we take a look at some of the other games going on right now, you will notice that all the games have the same starting position. So it's decided ahead of time what the position will be, and then that is how we start the games. And here Pranav choosing to push his pawn forward in the middle of the board. That pawn is supported by the white rook, and it feels like a sensible way of playing. But maybe that's going to mean that the white queen has more of a struggle getting into the game. So it's always interesting to see how what kind of plans the players choose early on. And here Pranav has chosen to open up for his bishops here and prioritizing that. And well, Naroditsky at this point just copying his opponent. So we're gonna jump through to some of the other games as well. And here we have a tremendously interesting situation from David Navarra playing against Vincent Kamer. Also here, of course, the same starting position. But Navarra, he chooses to prioritize opening up for the queen. And then he goes very aggressively and opens up for the bishop as well. The bishop pointing down where the black king is located. And already early on, Navarra here getting his queen out and then continuing this aggression with the pawns to the middle of the board. So interesting play there. White still choosing not to castle. I feel like that's inevitable that the white rook will just jump on the other side of the king, just like black did on that side. But one of the main advantages of white's position right now is that the bishop on a8 is having a miserable time because this bishop is being completely blocked by the pawns. And these pawns are just this bishop's biggest nightmare. So Navarra getting out here in a great position from the start. And that remains only one quarterfinal match, and that is the one between Matthias Bluebaum and Vladislav Kovalyev. And Bluebaum, interestingly, let's see how he prioritizes the opening. So he chooses a familiar plan akin to the one David Navarra used. He prioritizes grabbing a lot of space initially, opening up for his bishop, pointing down towards the black king. To stop the bishop's pressure, black intercedes with a pawn in the center, and then white continues the pawn aggression on the left side of the board. And here, already after 3 moves, both players, wow, on this third move, both players spent a minute and a half just to decide on their course of action. And that's incredibly rare to see such time usage early on, but that's one of the features. It's a feature, not a bug, of Fischer Random Chess, that when the players don't have that pre-game knowledge of all the openings in the world, they actually do have to think about how they want to proceed with the moves being played. And wow, controversial decision here by Bluebaum, putting his pawn 2 steps forward in the center. Yes, it does try to block black's bishop that was pointing down the board, but on the other hand, now the square d4 is a square that white is unable to defend with any pawns. So that means that would be a great location for some of black's pieces in the future. For instance, bishop f6 feeling like a good move here. The bishop then would give protection to the d4 square, as well as black's own pawn. So that is the 4 games, the 4 quarterfinals we have going on. If a game finishes early, they will just start the second game immediately afterwards. But if the game goes to Armageddon, then we will be having a break for the special bidding procedure. But I'm going to jump to a different game because I just noticed that there is chaos afoot in this Sarana versus Donchenko matchup. Look at all these pawns looking into each other, and they're choosing not to make the trades. Surprisingly for me, white has 3 pawns they can capture. Black has 2 pawns to capture, but in 3 different ways. And yet, black is just choosing to execute the castling move. The evaluation bar on the left hand side, which tries to tell us something about the game, that bar went completely nuts with this previous move, saying that white now has really good chances of getting a massive advantage. And to me, it just feels like pawn takes c5. That has to be the right capture. The idea being that after pawn takes pawn, if black now takes back, then white will capture in the center. There will be a lot of trades. And this pawn on c5 is what we call an isolated pawn. It cannot be protected by the other black pawns, and as such would be a major weakness in the long term. That being said, however, the computer eval was not super impressed when I put that in as the move. And it turns out Donchenko, using his human intuition, that's part of chess. Humans will all often have the same ideas because we think about chess in the same way. But there seems to have been some kind of hidden idea in that position that could have given white a big advantage. To this moment, I still don't understand why, but the moment has passed, and now we're in this new situation where the black pawn on c5 is a weakness that can be targeted. And I'm thinking queen to c2, get that queen pointing up against the pawn. Also, yes, I like this move as well because the square e4 is a really nice location for white's pieces. Black is struggling to be able to have a pawn move up and help control that e4 square, considering that the square f5 is just completely dominated by white's pieces. Yeah, I'm liking white's position. I'm liking the e4 square. I'm liking the fact that black has a weak pawn. I'm liking that white can get the rook involved. Getting the rook here, be the first one to have the rook on the open file, putting pressure down towards the bishop. I'm liking everything about Donchenko's position here. And so for the moment, he can be happy with his play. Although he does look a little bit concerned on camera, I can assure everyone that Alexander, he always looks slightly concerned. We're gonna jump on further, and we're gonna take a look at Vincent Kamer against David Navarra. Now, early on, we said that it was quite a beneficial situation for white due to the bishop in the corner being blocked by the white pawns in the center, restricting its influence. Moving forward, black did push the pawn up. The knight got into a great location. The bishop trying to chase away white's queen. Navarra doesn't go back. He just continues forward. A trade has been made where the bishop exchanged itself off. But that means white is now sitting pretty with the bishop pair. The black bishop still having those issues to resolve, pointing into the white central control. And yeah, I'm really liking white's position here. The bishop pair, yes, this bishop right now having kind of the same issue as the black bishop, but this bishop has a great future still because it's going to make its way up to the a3 square so that you can point down towards the furthest back pawn, the pawn on d6. This is what we kind of call the anchor of the pawn chain. When you got pawns like this defending each other up the board, you know, there's no use. There's no use in trying to attack the front because that's well defended. But if you go for the base of the pawn chain, that will yield you results. And that's probably also why Navarra, with his latest move, keeps his queen pointing in towards this d6 pawn. I'm really liking White's chances here. And Kamer also now having a big time deficit, having already spent 10 minutes on the first 13 moves. He's in trouble on the board and on the clock. And that's often no coincidence. Because very often when you get into trouble on the board, you spend a lot of time trying to find a good move. And there are situations in chess where simply good moves are not available. And then you end up spending a ton of time trying to figure out your troubles. But bad positions only have bad moves. So you spend forever trying to find a good one. Yeah, still liking Navarro's position, although I will say it was very good for Kamer here to get rid of that powerful white knight that had cemented itself inside Black's half of the board. So this is going to be a long struggle, but one where I favor White. Okay, we're going to go further and take a look at Bluebaum versus Kovalyev, because here, just like in the game with Bluebaum's compatriot Donchenko, we have that interesting situation with all the pawns being up against each other, really looking at each other in both directions. And yeah, when you have fights like these, it's often difficult to understand what is going on. My initial impression is that Black, and we've seen this in some of the other games as well. Remember, all the starting positions are the same in this quarterfinal match. So that means the bishop on a8, when that has now been a problem in not just one but two games for Black, it kind of suggests that the players are struggling to find a way for that bishop to thrive. Because here, it's pointing into not one but two of its own pawns struggling to get into the game. And therefore, I would definitely say White is for preference because of the bishop being blocked by its own pawns. That being said, the computer eval bar on the left-hand side is basically saying equal amounts of white and equal amounts of black. It's saying it's equal, but somewhere it's not equal is on the time, on the clock. And Kovalyev, he's down to just 5 minutes, while Bluebaum has 10. So yeah, there's a major discrepancy on time, and most of that came on this move we just witnessed. Kovalyev trying to figure out how to deal with all the possible captures in the center. He spends 3 minutes and 44 seconds before he pushes the pawn out on the side of the board. That being said, I do think this pawn move is a good one from Black. I think in general, when you're defending, you want to trade as many pawns as possible. And here he's putting pressure on the white pawn. The white pawn is not getting away from that. And if a trade is made, then Black's bishop can get into the game. So I'm saying this is rather equal, but White having the preference because White is up so much on time. Pranav is playing against Daniel Naroditsky, and in this game, it's the first game we've seen the bishop in the corner being an issue for white rather than black, and that's because in this case it's Naroditsky who has been aggressive with the pawns in the center, pushing that pawn forward to try and stunt the bishop. And that is a very, very good strategy, and one that is giving Naroditsky the edge in this game. And so now in 3 games, we've seen the importance of the bishop in the corner and trying to use the pawns in the center to complement the bishop, to help the bishop as best you can. That being said, Pranav now, with that pressure in towards the middle, with the knight and with the pawn, is actually making Naroditsky give away the bishop pair. Controversial decision, I would say, there from Naroditsky. That being said, after these trades are being made, capturing that pawn, the black bishop takes back, trades. What black is essentially saying, it's fine giving you the bishop pair, because what are the bishops really accomplishing? This guy still stuck being blocked by the black pawn, whereas the other bishop is being blocked by a white pawn. And so the bishop pair is only as good as your bishops. And here the white bishops are anything but impressive, which is why Naroditsky is willing to go into this situation. We're going to move on because we have a game where one of the players only has 2 minutes remaining. They started out with 15 minutes. So being down to 2 is quite a problem. And David Navarra here with the white pieces, he's fielding 7 minutes. That's a rather significant time advantage. That being said, I gotta say, Kamer has improved his situation. I was concerned about this white bishop coming up to the side of the board, putting pressure against the key pawn, the pawn furthest back, the base of the pawn chain on d6. But that plan has not been successful. Black, on the other hand, now is going to use that base of the pawn chain to move the knight forward and have that knight putting pressure on white's bishop. And it's white being forced back here at the moment. Wow, Kamer choosing not to move the knight forward. That is shocking to me. But there was a reason for it. Knight to c5 would have been a big blunder. White would then be able to sacrifice their rook against the knight, and if you recapture, the pawn moves forward in the center. The pawn is attacking the rook, fair enough, but it would also open up an attack from the bishop on the black king, and white would end up in a very good situation after all the skirmish had settled. So that explains why Kamer goes king f8, but that allows David Navarra to play bishop b2, the move we've been looking for so long. That bishop now is gonna make its way towards the d6 pawn. Kamer in a tremendous amount of trouble right now. It's only being worse by the fact that he's down to just 1 minute on the clock. He's not showing any signs of stress on the camera, but you can be sure his heart rate is elevated right now. He's trying to calculate what happens if the black knight moves up to c5. In my opinion, it's basically Black's only defensive plan, just trying to get that knight to a good location, trying to kind of stand in the way of White's bishops. Wow, knight to c5 has been played, and David Navarra just sacrifices his rook on that knight as if nothing special is happening. Kamer captures the rook. Now Kamer is up a rook in exchange for a bishop, but the key is that White's pawn is attacking the black rook. The black rook has to move, and then now the bishop coming in to capture on e5. This white bishop is just having a field day, starting to capture the black pawns once the base of the pawn chain was removed. So this incredible sacrifice of the rook against the knight, it's all about overloading the base of the pawn chain, making sure that this pawn can no longer defend its buddies further up the board. And as we rejoin the game with the continuation we had, bishop takes e5 has been played. And here, the next pawn is in big trouble as well. And once those two pawns have been eliminated, the white pawns are just going to make their way up the board. And black is going to be completely defenseless to stop them in their path. Okay, g5 has been played, trying for the longest possible to protect their own pawns. Bishop f6 on the board, the bishop moving away so that you can put your pawn up, also putting pressure on black's pawn. Kamer then getting his king involved. Good decision from Kamer, very good decision. Sacrificing this pawn, because then if that pawn is captured, you can move your rook up to b2. And that is still black's intention. The rook is now ready to come up to this b2 square because white no longer is controlling that because they pushed their pawn forward. Okay, what's the next step for Navarra? He's playing against an opponent with 22 seconds left. He has sacrificed his own rook. That means a mistake on white's part here can cost very dearly. I would say the move here to play is the pawn to g4. I'm really liking this pawn to g4 move. It's absolutely vital that white's bishop is allowed access to the f5 square. And I would like to have my pawn up to help out the bishop to go there. Okay, bishop e4 is a fine move. It's completely okay. The pawn now probably should push forward. Kamer, less than 10 seconds on the clock. Kamer tries to make the exchange between the bishops. Navarra immediately putting his rook pointing down towards the black rook. Not sure I'm a fan of that. Now this black pawn is pushing its way forward, uncontrolled. I would say now the white bishop should move back, trying to get this pawn, stop it in its tracks. I would still really like to see the move g4 at some point. g4 coming up, maybe king up to f2, followed by g4. And Navarra playing against an opponent with just 7 seconds remaining. But if you make a mistake here, you're down a rook for a bishop. That's going to be very costly. Navarra taking his time here, trying to figure out how to advance the pawns. If white is going to win this game, it's going to be because these pawns just makes their way forward to become new queens. Right now, black very solidly putting their pieces in front of the pawns, making sure that they cannot advance further. Black also has this pawn on c3, which acts as a distraction, making sure that white can't do whatever you want without punishment. For instance, if white is being too aggressive with this bishop, the black pawn would just make its way down the board. So Navarra taking a long think here to figure out the situation. And while Navarra is thinking, we're going to stop by the Bluebaum versus Kovalyev game, because here Kovalyev is down to just 12 seconds on the clock But it's equal on material right now. The big question is whether or not the German player can capture a black pawn undefended with his rook. That pawn has been captured. White now up a pawn in this situation, and it's going to be an endgame that's going to be undecided for some time still. So while this endgame is they're figuring it out, we're going to go back to David Navarra and his 7-second situation against Vincent Kamer. The reason why is because here, because there are more pieces on the board, because it's a more unbalanced position with one player having a bishop, the other player having a rook, this is much more likely to be decided all of a sudden. That being said, Navarra now taking his really taking time to think about the situation, and frankly, kind of losing control of what's going on, because in the latest moves, he first gave up the pawn on e5. Now he's giving up the pawn on d6. Navarra has given up both of the pawns that were supposed to be his bread and butter. Yes, he manages to get his bishop up and capture 2 black rooks on that same diagonal, but now the situation has changed completely. Kamer is now down on material. Kamer is going to lose that rook he was up in exchange for the bishop. White is going to be up a pawn, but it's black with a pawn that's closest to becoming a new queen. And that means being down a pawn, but having the best potential of getting a new queen. That just makes for a really, really thrilling finish where anything could happen. And in fact, all the games in this quarterfinal are going down to the wire. There are 3 different boards in which one of the players now have less than 20 seconds on the clock. And we're going to have to prioritize here very difficultly. And wow, okay, the capture of the pawn on a7 has allowed Kamer to do a counter sacrifice against the white pawn. And now this bishop's diagonal is much better, because earlier it was pointing in towards 2 white pawns. Now it's only pointing against 1. This bishop is also helping out with the pawn trying to make its way down to becoming a new queen. David Navarra has really spoiled this game. And now he's the one fighting to make a draw, having to deal with the black pawn trying to become a new queen down the board. David Navarra now less than 20 seconds on the clock. Kamer down to just 10 seconds. But Kamer has the advantage of having been low on time for a longer period, which means he's kind of already in the mindset that you just have to play quick moves. And here he's coming in with the rook, forcing the white king to move further away from the black pawn. Black is trying to make a breakthrough here, trying to get that pawn moving in to become a new queen. But it does appear that Navarra, for the moment, has the situation under control. He's using his bishop and his rook to help protect the queening square, making sure no funky business is going to happen there. In the meantime, he's pushing his own pawn further forward. And wow, Kamer tries to make a draw. Kamer tries to make a draw, but then realizes his king is not in time to make it across and stop the white pawn. Kamer loses the game. The white pawn is just going to make it through. Kamer, in having been under pressure for a very long time, he falters in the end. And he ends up losing an endgame where we thought he was putting pressure. And we could also see from his reaction, he was very dismayed with his own effort there. He really thought he had that situation under control. When he sacrificed his rook for the bishop, he definitely thought he was securing a draw through a clever play. Someone who's not securing a draw here is Kovalyev with the black pieces. Bluebaum now making the final calculations on whether or not he can trade his rook for the bishop? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes, because this white pawn is making its way through to becoming a new queen. The white bishop will have to retreat to stop the black pawn, but that's okay, because in the meantime, the white pawn is having its triumphant day, making a new queen. So Kovalyev has to resign the game. We're moving on to the next big struggle, and this is Alexander Donchenko, who's been under 20 seconds for a very, very long time in this game. He's now going to be able to secure a draw, even though he's down a bishop. Donchenko now can get the draw by trading pawns. That being said, how do you trade pawns? Black is doing their best to keep the pawns on the board. Ooh, just moving the king to the side. Very clever play. The king is just going to go back and forth, back and forth. There's nothing really black can do about this game. 81 moves. I think before the broadcast, before we started the games, I said that in Fischer Random, because players are not familiar with the openings, I said the games are often shorter and decided within the first 10 moves. That was definitely not the case here, with over 80 moves being made without a winner being found. This game, I'm going to call it, it's going to end in a draw. And also ending in a draw by mutual agreement in a situation where both players had less than 20 seconds on the clock. It's Pranav, the only non-grandmaster in this knockout stage against Danya Naroditsky. So that game ends up with a draw. And moving back to our final game, Donchenko against Sarana. This also gonna end in a draw, as the white king just stays close to the black pawn, and Sarana allowing a stalemate finish to end it after 98 moves. Wow, these guys have come to fight, and they're not done just yet, because the next games start immediately after the first one. There's no rest for the wicked. And these players, 98 moves long game, and they're just going to have to start all over again immediately. And if you recognize this starting position, you are absolutely correct. This is the same starting position as they had with colors reversed. And now both players, of course, being more aware of the plans in the opening, may choose a different direction than the one they chose in the first game. And Sarana and Donchenko here choosing to play the identical opening moves as in the Pranav against Naroditsky game that we just barely missed the finish of. Okay. So let's do a recap on the results of the first game. We have two winners. That is David Navarra beating the German Kamer. But Germany makes a comeback in the match with Bluebaum. Bluebaum winning his game against Kovalyev. And noticeably, both the winners managed to win their games with the white pieces. So at least Kovalyev and Kamer, they do have the white pieces now when they're trying to strike back. We're going to join Kamer first, because here we already have a rather unusual situation. But I think, interestingly, I think this is what they've decided is the best way to play. Pushing their pawns forward on the queen side. So this was the plan that was utilized twice in the first game, and it's also the plan Kamer opts for here. As far as I'm gonna have to actually get confirmation with the chess.com fair play team. But I would assume that these players playing in a world championship qualifier, this is a world championship, I would assume that they have helpers to at least tell them what the best plans are in the opening during that like 10-second break they have. I'm not sure whether they would have enough time to confer with an opening helper. But seeing as how we're playing the same position in 2 games, there is like a couple of seconds where you can at least have a quick hint that okay, playing the pawns forward on the queen side could be the optimal strategy. It is the plan chosen by Kamer, but I gotta say, I'm really liking what David Navarra is doing with his bishop. In the first games, we saw that this bishop, especially for the player with the black pieces, it got stuck in the corner. But Navarra here, smartly getting that bishop forward and then pushing the pawn up. The pawn now defending the bishop in the center. The bishop just beautifully placed, having that influence in 2 directions of the board. And I'm going to say this is as good of a situation you can get having won the first game. This is looking very promising for Navarra here. Okay, so we're gonna take a look also at the other match who had a first round winner. That is Kovalyev against Bluebaum. And here we have a pawn sacrifice from white early on. This pawn on e4 is an extra pawn for black. You would think white has given it away on purpose. But right now, I'm struggling to see any justification of that. In fact, this pawn is doing a great job controlling the d3 square, making sure that the white knight cannot make its way forward. This pawn is also blocking the white rook. And the black pawn on f6 also doing a great job together with the pawn on g7. These 2 pawns are effectively just taking out the queen and bishop battery pointed down towards black's king side. Yeah, I'm going to say maybe that sacrifice was on purpose, but Bluebaum, having gotten the win in the first game, now with a pawn up in the second, he's the biggest favorite right now to make it to the semifinals. Where I'm going to keep moving on and visit the chess.com legend that is Danya Naroditsky. He's playing against the only non-grandmaster, also the only Indian in this knockout field, Pranav. And Pranav already having the computer's blessing. There's slightly more black than white on the left side on our eval bar, which indicates that the computers are liking black's situation. And I gotta admit, to me, this just looks very, very equal. But having the black pieces, you don't mind that the computers favoring you. And this latest move is a really strange one. Pranav fianchettoing his knight, and in the same maneuver, kind of blocking his own bishop. The idea is that the knight needed to move so that the black pawn can step forward and influence the center. Yeah, I think that black knight is going to be returning to where it came from. Essentially, this is why we often don't like having pieces placed in front of our central pawns, because our central pawns need to go first. They need to be the infantry of the army, taking that first fight with the opponents, and then the pieces will kind of follow in from behind, like artillery or similar. And here, Pranav spending time moving his knight away. The only intention is to move the pawn up. And after this pawn has been moved up, you just know the knight is going to return where it came from. So now I'm expecting pawn to d5, and then pretty much no matter what Naroditsky does, the knight is returning to d6 afterwards. And both Danya and Pranav struggling to place their webcams. But the little we do see of Naroditsky does seem to be concerned, and that with good reason. Black is seizing the initiative in this game, pushing the pawn forward. It's also very early for Danya. As far as I know, he's on the East Coast, and it's 8 p.m. there. So no, 8 a.m. Sorry, which is not a normal chess professional working hour. We're going to move on to the final game that we haven't taken a look at from this game 2 of the Fischer Random World Championship qualifier. We're in the quarterfinals right now. We're going to find one winner to make it through to the finals in Reykjavik, Iceland. Oh my gosh, I made that mistake yesterday as well. Reykjavik, Iceland is the host of the Fischer Random Finals. That's going to happen at the end of October. And one of these players we're following right now will be invited to play that event alongside the current world champion, Wesley So, and the runner-up, Magnus Carlsen. So will that person be Alexei Sarana? And right now, I'm saying yes, it could very well be. Sarana here with the white pieces has managed to push his pawn up in the middle of the board. And this is something we discussed in the previous games as well. Getting that pawn 2 steps up is such a crucial strategic feature of these positions when the bishops are in the corner, because right now this black bishop is pointing in towards 2 white pawns, 1 white pawn protected by the other. That's as good as burying the bishop alive. The bishop will need to find another diagonal, and in order to do so, that bishop is going to have to spend some time trying to find better pastures. But that is number 1, time consuming, allowing your opponent to improve their pieces quickly. But also, frankly, if that bishop were to make its way up the board, it would still just be chased away by white's pawns. So I'm really liking Sarana's position. He has a very nice space advantage, which essentially means that his pawns are more aggressive, which is good because it limits the options for the opponent's pieces. And for instance, Sarana also has this bishop pointing in towards a pawn protected by another pawn. So it's kind of the similar situation, but one of the main differences is that white does have the option of moving the pawn forward to challenge in towards that annoying pawn, whereas black has no way of using a pawn to challenge the white blockader, the white piece, making sure that the bishop is not getting involved. So I'm really liking Sarana's position here, and Sarana is just continuing playing his pawns up the board. And at this stage, I'm feeling like Donchenko's best hope of survival might just be trying to block everything, just avoiding the trades, and then sorry, I said avoiding trades, not making the trades, avoiding the trades, and then just hoping white is unable to strike in towards the black king. Mm, the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing that's not very realistic. Donchenko, he does decide to make the trade of pawns. Now we have an opening between the queens. I'm surprised Donchenko chose not to make the queen trade. He played knight to d7. And now, if I'm Sarana, I'm very happy that I get to keep the queens on the board, because long term, when you have a situation like this where one player is clearly better, clearly has the more aggressive pawns, but it's just about the opponent hunkering down and hoping for the best, you definitely want to have a queen in those situations, because then you can create a checkmating attack in the future. So I feel like Donchenko made a mistake there, not getting the queens off the board while he had a chance to do so. We're going to go into one of the most exciting matchups we have had, which was David Navarra winning in great style the first game against the youngster Vincent Kamer. And right now, I'm going into this game because Kamer is down to just 3 minutes on the clock. And now, just as we joined the game, we see that Navarra also capturing a white pawn with his bishop. Navarra is simply up a pawn at this stage. He only needs a draw to secure his spot in the semifinal. Kamer with his rook along the edge of the board, putting pressure in towards the black pawn. And Navarra choosing not to defend. Ooh, what a tricky guy. Navarra castles. Now, the castling did nothing for the black king. The king remains in the same position. But by castling, the rook manages to get involved, getting its way over here to help protect the pawn on c6. And the reason black didn't need that protection immediately is because if white here were to capture, then black would put the queen on the same diagonal as the white rook. Yeah, if the white rook moves now, the queen is lost. However, if the white rook does not move, the rook is lost because black has 2 pieces pointing towards it. So that would have been the end of the game. Kamer then avoids that trap, but just being able to play that trap overall has enabled Navarra now to get his rook and have the rook defending the pawn, which is an optimal restructuring of the pieces. And now Navarra, knowing that a draw is just as good as a win, he's just trying to make as many trades as possible. And Navarra is saying, yes, I don't mind you capturing my bishop. I don't mind making trades. Even if I lose the pawn on d4, I will just capture the pawn on e2. I don't care that I then lose the pawn on c6, because I'm just trying to get rid of as many pieces and pawns as is possible to make it a very obvious draw. And with that draw, black does make it through to the quarterfinal. So very, very clever play here from David Navarra. He's not playing the best moves in the position, the objectively best moves, but he is playing the best moves to make a draw, and with that, secure his spot in the semifinal. And that variation we just analyzed, it's all happened on the board. Kamer now down to just 1 minute 38. And black here has an easy move. The rook coming into the middle of the board, pointing down towards that white queen, towards the white pawn. and this is going to be a draw at the minimum, a draw at the minimum for Navarra, and then he's going to make it through to the semifinal as the first player. Okay, so we're going to check who will be joining Navarra in that, and one of those candidates is Alexei Sarana, who has this quite a closed position against Alexander Donchenko. But one of the problems here is the pawn on h5. The pawn on h5. Now with white's latest move, you would think that, oh, black can just move their pawn one step forward and offer protection to its buddy on the side. But with that latest move, white is very clearly announcing their intentions of going after the h5 pawn, keeping in mind that now the pawn to g6 defense is taken out, as white can just capture. Donchenko moves his bishop out on the side, pressure against the c4 pawn. White retreats, thereby opening up for the bishop to help in the defense. King up from both players. So much potential here in white's position, but it's Donchenko who's saying, okay, if you want to play on the king side, if you want to go after my pawn on h5, I'm ready for that. I'm realizing that I'm kind of getting squeezed if I don't do anything quickly. So now Donchenko is announcing his intention to push his pawn forward, make a trade, and have his rook pointing down towards the white king. And the big question now for me is what happens if queen to d1? Queen to d1 is played. So here the queen and bishop working together against the h5 pawn. That releases the defense on the c4 pawn. But Sarana is correctly, in my opinion, judging that the pawn on the side of the board is so much more important than this pawn on c4. And that's not because we prefer to capture pawns on the side. It's because this side pawn, when that one is captured, will also get an attack in towards the black king, and the black rooks will be very limited in their choices. So Donchenko advances the pawn in front of his own king, and he wanted to recapture with his rook, but if he had taken with the rook here, then white just wins the game with the bishop coming in, pointing up against the king and rook. So instead, he tries to use the king for that purpose, so that the king is now defending on h5 together with the rook. And Sarana just doesn't care. Sarana captures the pawn on the side, even though Donchenko did so much to keep it protected. And the idea here is that if the rook recaptures the bishop, the queen comes up. The queen is putting pressure on the rook, on the king, and on the rook behind the king. In order for the king to keep the protection of the rook on h5, the king has to go to the side, but then the rook behind is undefended. Beautiful, beautiful tactics here from Alexei Sarana. He has secured himself an important pawn that was also one of the key defenders around the black king. He hasn't actually won a pawn overall, though, I must say, because he has abandoned his own pawn on c4. So that pawn, there's no way of defending it. So that pawn is definitely going to be lost. In the meantime, Sarana trying to regroup his attack. He's now trying to get his bishop in to put pressure on the black rook. Donchenko with his knight coming forward. The knight now making a nasty threat. The knight wanted to come in, attack the queen, and attack the king. That double threat needed to be prevented. The rook takes care of business. The bishop now on its way to infiltrating into the heart of black's position. Sarana definitely to be favored in this situation, but it's by far over just yet. We're just gonna quickly stop by the game Kamer versus Navarra, which ended in a draw. Navarra, we saw earlier, and we kind of concluded that this game would end in a draw. Way back when we had this situation where Navarra had an extra pawn but was just trading pieces to secure his semifinal spot. He has made it through to the next stage, to the semifinal. And another player who made it is Matthias Bluebaum. And that came more out of nothing. In fact, we haven't really seen any of this game since the opening, but we did note that Bluebaum, he got that extra pawn early on, and he just never looked back. And he got a slightly better position from the opening and managed to hold that favorable situation till the end. He wins 2 in a row and thereby gets into the semifinal. That means we have 2 more games going, and both of these matches are games that made a draw in the first round. So a decisive result here will take it in that player's favor. And we're joining here Danya Naroditsky with the white pieces. Danya has a really nice coordination between the rooks pointing down the open F file, and black really cannot compete for control there. However, the eval bar is showing a little bit more black than white on the side. And that's because white is pretty bad at having control of the light squares. So if white had this pawn one step further back, the situation would be much, much better. And wow, the players just make a draw. Naroditsky offers a draw. The draw has been accepted. And this match will go into an Armageddon. We're going to get an extra game in this quarterfinal. So the final game to see if we can get a semi-finalist before Armageddon games. It's this one between Sarana and Donchenko that we studied in detail earlier. It's still equal on number of pawns, but the black king feeling way more uncomfortable than white's king. The black king only having 1 pawn in front of it, while the white king has 2 pawns. In addition, the white knight is a bit better placed than its black counterpart. But otherwise, it's pretty even. I would say it's much more even than the eval bar on the side seems to suggest, where it's just almost exclusively white and very low percentages for black. Donchenko being pretty equal on time as well. He just has to hunker down at this point, just trying to survive into the time scramble where anything could happen. White now very scarily having the queen and rook coordinating in towards the black pawn, and Donchenko chooses to just abandon his pawn. Controversial decision, I would say. What was wrong with taking that pawn and then also trying to take the next pawn and the next pawn? There was a triangle of black pawns ready for the taking in that scenario. Instead, white starting to push their pawns forward on the side of the board. Also, a good move as far as I can tell. I think Sarana wants to take the pawn on f6, but he just wants to get rid of the black queen first. Rook g5. That invites knight to g4. I mean, in what universe is white not playing knight to g4 right now? Knight to g4 would threaten knight takes f6. It would open up for the bishop against the black rook. To me, it just seems like the most great move ever. But maybe it's not. Maybe there's like some fishy business with the queen coming to attack both the rook and bishop. Wow. Rook g5. It's a brilliant practical move from Donchenko because the human reaction of knight to g4, even though I still haven't quite understood why knight g4 was not a great move here, I did notice the eval bar. The computer didn't like that move being selected for white. And that goes to show that there are still plenty of complications in this position and that nothing yet has been decided here. And Sarana, having a time advantage before this move, he's now giving up the entirety of that time advantage, trying to figure out these complications with the black rook seductively placing itself on the same diagonal as the bishop. It's so natural to just look for some way of exploiting that pressure the bishop can give on the rook. But after 1 minute and 46 seconds of thought, Sarana decides, let's just play it safe. Let's just defend the pawn that's being attacked. Yeah, that may have been the best option under the circumstances. Now the black rooks are working together, pointing down towards the white king. The white knight making a retreat, but that was a well-timed retreat, offering necessary protection around white's own king. This opened an attack from the bishop on the black rook, but instead of wow, things are happening now. Instead of moving the rook, black has gotten their queen into an attacking position, pointing in towards the white king. And black is actually now up by a pawn, and now the white rook is being threatened. On the other hand, this white pawn is just 2 steps away from becoming a new queen. Wow, why are you doing this? Why are you giving up your rook? A horrible mistake by Sarana. Let's take a look at his camera to see if he realizes what he's just done. He just gives away his rook. Yes, he had a pawn moving up, but right now, when you capture black's rook, you lose that pawn. You don't get a new queen like that. Sarana holding his hand to his face, realizing the momentum, the greatness of his error. Donchenko, who was very fortunate in the last round, getting into the 7th place when top 8 qualified. Donchenko had a losing position in that final round, managed to turn it around and win it. He's about to turn it around again. The comeback king, very close to a semi-final spot right now. But he makes a mistake that turns the computer against him. Donchenko trying to get a new queen, and he's gonna get a new queen. Donchenko here with 2 queens. He thought 2 queens surely is gonna be enough to win the game, but it turns out it's the complete opposite. White's queen and bishop is working together to give a checkmate on the black king instead, and now Sarana has the option of getting a new queen himself, but he doesn't even care. He's just gonna recapture the rook, because he knows that, well, he can get a new queen on the next move. And if he does not capture the black rook right now, that rook is going to escape. We're going to have a situation right now with both players having 2 queens. What an end. And the computer now saying the position is equal. Somehow there is some poetic justice in that. Neither player really deserving to lose this game. Donchenko now down to 15 seconds. His queens are getting involved. I'm going to say black is the major favorite to win this now, because the white king is feeling unsafe as the first black queen is about to start giving checks. Oh no, but white has 2 queens coordinating together as well, going in against the knight. Maybe black should go for a trade of queens. The trade of queens has been offered and accepted. We now have a situation where black has 2 pawns and bishop in exchange for a rook. Yeah, anything could happen. Donchenko down to just 3 seconds on the clock. He needs to start moving faster. The knight comes up, attacking the queen. The queen moves. The queen now can come in and attack the king. Instead, the knight is trying to get involved for Sarana. Both players less than 10 seconds on the clock. Now knight to f4, a very tempting move. Instead, Donchenko moving his bishop forward. I don't really like that move from Donchenko. If white can get his rook involved here somehow, this feels like an excellent opportunity to win the game. Back and forth, back and forth. Yes, the players decide it's been too much fun. No, they decide it's not too much fun. Donchenko goes away. Donchenko chooses not to repeat the moves, and that was a massive mistake because that allowed the white rook to get into the attack, and now it's Donchenko having to resign the game with white's queen coming in for the checkmate. Oh, Sarana even could give a checkmate in one move. He didn't see it. But now queen f7, next move, checkmate. Oh my gosh, what a game. We're going to have to go through that once again. Okay, so we had a situation. First, Sarana makes a huge error, allowing black to be up a rook and somehow could have saved himself with even though the attack was rather dangerous towards the black king. Donchenko then chooses to get a new queen, but that was a big mistake. For some reason I don't really understand. And then Sarana chooses not to get a new queen immediately because he just wants to capture the rook. But then we get this situation with both players having 2 queens, and it was just incredible chaos. What a game. And we're not done with the action just yet from this Fischer Random World Championship qualifier. We're going to take a break, kind of try to digest what just happened. And then we'll be back with Armageddon games in the quarterfinal between Pranav and Naroditsky. After the worldwide qualifiers, we're closing in on the Chess.com Global Championship with $1 million at stake, returning on September the 14th. Watch some of the greatest players on the planet compete for the title of Chess.com Global Champion and some serious bragging rights. Type CGC, exclamation point CGC in chat for more information. And with that, we're back with the World Championship in Fischer Random. This is a qualifier for the big finals in Reykjavik, Iceland, coming up at the end of October. And right now, we've watched the quarterfinals, but they're not over just yet. We have one undecided quarterfinal, and we're going to have to use a tiebreaker to decide the match between Danya Naroditsky and Pranav. And here are the rules. The players bid on what time they are comfortable with. Choosing colors afterwards. So in Armageddon, the black player wins and goes through to the next round in case the game is drawn. And so the players are essentially voting how much time they're willing to have in order to get the advantage of draw odds. And we have had a bidding procedure. And we've had bids where Danya Naroditsky was the player who bid the least amount of time. And as such, he has gotten the advantage of having the black pieces, but then the disadvantage of being lower on time. Danya, he chose to start with 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And as you may notice, we're playing the same starting position here as we have in the two previous games. So it's the same position throughout the quarterfinal leg. And Pranav here being aggressive with the pawn on the side of the board. Interesting decision here from the Indian player. Pushing the pawn up, trying to create some sort of an attack. Attacking chess definitely necessary when you lose in case of a draw. But then, wow, very controversial, but also interesting play from Pranav. So we've seen game after game that this bishop starting in the corner of the board, that bishop has often been a problem piece for either player. And right now, it's white who is the only one who has one of these bishops remaining. And that bishop is pointing down on a black pawn defended by another black pawn and is out of play for the foreseeable future. The reason I thought it was so controversial, this previous move of Pranav, is that he's voluntarily not only trading off that bishop that often landed itself in trouble, he's also giving himself doubled pawns. And afterwards, he's actually going into a situation where the queens get traded off. And this opening has been a bit of a disappointment, I would say, for Pranav, because he now has doubled pawns in the middle of the board. It's less important that they're doubled when they're in the middle because now at least they're doing a great job taking control of important squares. But at the same time, trading queens this early on, I would think that favors the player who makes it through to the semifinal in case of a draw. Interesting decisions being made. The engine slightly prefers white, but Danya definitely gonna feel confident about having such a position that is not very trappy. It's not filled with traps and complications and stuff like that. Now it's all about just getting the pieces into decent places and then being ready for white launching an endgame assault instead of doing an attack with the queens still on the board. So, Naroditsky now being allowed to play the pawn to h5. This means that the pawn on h4 can no longer make its way further forward, which in return means that this pawn with the black bishop pointing in towards it is just going to be a constant pain for white to have to deal with. And now the black pawn on the opposite side is trying to go up and push the white knight. But Danya will not want to be too aggressive with his pawns, risking that they will then be captured afterwards. And I was wrong. Okay, Danya is being risky with his pawns. But I gotta say, I really like White's maneuver here, with the knight making its way, rerouting to a situation where it can attack this side pawn that has now stepped into White's half of the board. Danya with his knight trying to get into the b4 square, trying to put a check on White's king. That check is denied. The white pawn moving forward, taking control of that b4 square Black wanted to utilize. Also making sure that this a4 pawn doesn't run further up the board. It just White just wants the pawn to stay where it is so that the knight can come in to attack it. And I gotta say, I'm really liking White's position now, which I'm surprised myself, given that this pawn on the side of the board seemed to be somewhat of a long-term problem, in addition to voluntarily taking on the doubled pawns in the center. Now I'm liking White's chances of just getting the rooks involved on this left side. And notice how the white king is right in the center of the action right now. So this is where it's happening. Everything now is about this pawn on a4 and whether or not that pawn is going to be in deep, deep trouble. But when stuff is happening on that side, Black is not very happy having their king so far away from the action. And Danya is going to have to make a long journey with that king, trying to get it in towards the center, while White's king can just stay put where it is. That being said, Danya moving his bishop back, forcing the white rook into a defensive stance. I'm really liking that move from Danya. The rook now taking on that defensive positioning. How is White gonna turn that around? I would think the move f4 is definitely on the agenda. While Black, I'm not sure what Black is doing. I guess maybe get the king up along the side to facilitate a pawn break with f5. This is a very interesting strategic position. Neither player has a clear method of improving, And that means the time situation becomes very relevant because in these strategic positions, you often want to take a lot of time to think about, okay, how am I going to maneuver my pieces? How am I going to get everyone well placed? And look at this from Danya Naroditsky. He's moving his bishop away from the pressure on the h4 pawn. White then taking the opportunity with that knight maneuver we've been looking for so long. The knight coming in, attacking the pawn, and Naroditsky not even defending the pawn. I thought he was going to have to move his rook to point to a purely defensive stance. Instead, he's trying to take control over the open file. But, I mean, can I not take this one now? Oh, I see the trick. There's a trick. There's a trick. I barely saw it, but Pranav, he probably saw it way before me. And Pranav now realizing that he's going to need both his knights over to this side of the board. Oh, this is some really nice maneuvering from the Indian player. The knight now getting ready to capture on a4 because if you had done that previously, if the knight had captured on a4, then rook a8 would attack both the knight and the pawn. I was thinking that, well, that's okay. We can just come with the king to protect the knight. But then black would sacrifice their knight to force the king back. And when the king is forced back, black would get back that pawn you gave away initially. And it would be an equal material situation where white has some isolated pawns, poorly defended pawns along the side of the board. So instead, Pranav is bringing his other knight so that in this instance, taking here and then bringing the next knight into the defense was a threat. So Danya actually he concedes that he needed to move his rook yet again into a defensive position. The white knight taking a step forward in the center so that the next white knight also can make it. Look at the improvement these white knights have had over the course of a couple of moves. These knights went from being all over on the king side to just completely shifting their attention to the opposite side. And now knight to f6. Wow. What a move. Where is this knight going? I think it's just going to stay put. Now the next knight is coming up. Wow, this is a proper nightmare for Danya Naroditsky. He's being pushed back on every side of the board. And white's knights now in dominating positions. And notice how the knights are placing themselves where there are no black pawns that can come in and put pressure towards the knights. Really instructive play so far from Pranav, who also has a significant time advantage. He knows he needs to open up more areas of attack, and he does so beautifully with the move f4. So now the white knights have forced the black pieces into defensive positions. Now we're just starting more attacking on the opposite side. Danya desperately trying to make trades. He's trying to ease his defensive worries, and white just avoiding those trades whenever you can. The eval bar did not like that previous move, but I can't really understand why. Worst case, when the knight is attacked, you just step back, and it should be fine. It should be fine unless unless Danya now is about to get one of his knights into the d4 square. Okay, maybe this has been an error in judgment for Pranav here. That Danya is going to capture the pawn on f4 next. Now, normally you would think, okay, my opponent captures, I capture back. I no longer have the doubled pawns. This must be a good trade for me. But it turns out these doubled pawns on the same file, they were actually doing such a great job of controlling some key central squares the Black Knights wanted to use. And Danya has now captured the pawn on f4, trying to get White to capture back with their pawn, which in turn then means that the pawn leaves the protection of the important d4 square, which is why here White chooses to make a knight trade instead. But that knight trade is probably nothing to be concerned about. We can probably make that trade and then get our bishop into a great location on the f6 square.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, but we're...
Yeah, but if we do move that bishop, maybe we'll then be afraid of this knight jumping around. Danya instead choosing to get his king involved. We talked about earlier how this black king was pretty far away from where the real stuff was going down. Now he's made good progress, making his way over towards the queen side. So the king now taking control of the protection of the d6 pawn. That means now the rook can find a different job. Maybe this rook wants to go back in towards the middle. And the bishop also finding a good location now. The bishop just making its way to that d4 square. Danya, over the course of the past 10 moves, has massively improved his situation. He is about to get his pieces into good squares. However, White will be the first player to get a rook to the open B file. Will the rook be able to infiltrate in towards the black pawns? I feel like that is the key question right now. White's rook coming in, it's going to make its way all the way to the other side and coming in behind the black pawns, trying to put pressure on them. And speaking of coming in behind the pawns, the Black Knight had the very same idea. And now that knight is putting pressure on the lone pawn on the side of the board. And if Naroditsky here manages to force White into moving the rook back, that will be a massive moral victory. Not only because moving back and forth is pretty bad in chess, but also if the rook moves back, the black rook will be able to take over control of the open file and make its way to start attacking the white king. So yeah, this is a major turnaround. It turns out the pawn on h4 is actually lost. White cannot afford to move the rook back into a defensive position, protecting the pawn. So then the question remains, how is White now going to win? And I'm going to say maybe rook to b6 and start pushing pawns forward in the center. Maybe that's the only hope for a win right now. But once you start giving away pawns on the side of the board, this knight is going to take, and then it's going to move away, and then this black pawn is going to be very optimistic about the future, having a clear path forward to becoming a new queen. So yeah, it seems like Danya Naroditsky is going to the semifinals. Pranav struggling over this move now for more than 2 minutes. he realizes he cannot move his rook back because then Danya will take control of the open file. And instead, he kind of does a bit of both. Pranav moves the rook back, but he moves the rook in such a way that he attacks the knight, so that at least now rook b7 and rook infiltrating, that's not an option for black. That being said, he does nothing to prevent the black knight from simply capturing on the side. I think Danya spent most of his time there wondering what is going on, because he just couldn't understand what White's idea was. Here we get to know the plan. Pawn to f5. So what's the plan now? If rook to b7 and rook tries to infiltrate.
Hi, everyone.
Find out, because Naroditsky had the same question. He was wondering, what are you really doing against my main plan of just invading with my rook? Black also at this point has captured an important pawn on the side of the board. I'm almost ready to call it. That black knight, it doesn't have a lot of available squares, but it has one. As long as that knight has one square it can escape to, it's not being trapped. And then there's it feels like black has the situation under control. Danya now also coming in with the pre-moves. He knows that he has nothing to fear from going into a repetition of moves. So here, Danya is going to play the move King d8, because he knows, okay, King d8, objectively not the best move, because now White can go back and forth, and it's a draw, despite Black being down, a pawn. But a draw equals a win under the special tiebreak Armageddon rules. So there's absolutely no concern in allowing such a back and forth maneuver. Pranav, and then instead rerouting the knight to capture the pawn on d6, and after that pawn has been captured, the pawn will try to make its way up the board through the center. To me, that feels like a very good idea from White. Danya choosing not to capture this side pawn. Danya instead deciding he's in a rush and he just wants to get his pawn up the board as quickly as possible. White continues the plan of going after the d6 pawn. Black continues their plan of just rushing as quickly as possible. The knight will capture in the center. And then the big threat was e5. Yeah, so here, if the pawn just continues forward for black, then if that pawn becomes a new queen, that's all good and dandy. But there is a checkmate on the black king in return. So Danya made sure that he didn't just push the pawn forward to becoming a new queen. He also moves his knight to a defensive position, making sure that the white pawns cannot move up. And then Danya sacrifices his rook on the knight, and he finishes in beautiful style. Oh my gosh, what a play from Danya Naroditsky. He sacrifices his rook for the knight because he realizes that this pawn is just going all the way on its own. The pawn cannot be captured because then black will have a knight coming in with the fork, the attack on the king, the attack on the rook. It's just beautiful. Well, if you don't take the pawn is becoming a new queen. And Danya takes home the win and makes his way to the semifinal. A really good defensive display there after he came under some pressure with white's knights jumping around in black's position. And both players, offering good games to the opponent in game chat. You love to see it. We're going to be taking a break now, and then we'll be back with the semifinals of this Fischer Random World Chess Championship. It all comes down to this match. Grandmaster Katarina Lagno takes on the reigning women's speed chess champion Hu Yifan this Friday, September the 2nd at 4 a.m. Pacific. Call into work sick now. You cannot miss this clash of titans on Friday. So that is going to be the Women's Speed Chess Championship final. We're here now with the Fischer Random World Championship qualifier. And we started out with 8 players today. We're now down to 4 because we have eliminated half of our field. Alexei Sarana takes down Alexander Donchenko. He will now be facing Matthias Bluebaum, who took down Kovalyev in the only match to end 2-0. David Navarra taking down the prodigy, German prodigy that is Vincent Kamer. David Navarra will now face another big challenge in Daniel Naroditsky, who we just saw beating Pranav in the tiebreaker match. And our format for the semifinals is the same as in our quarterfinals. We're still playing 2 games, 1 game with black, 1 game with white. It's the same starting position for each game. And if they're tied, we will be using another Armageddon to make sure we find a winner, making it through to the final, which will be held tomorrow. And the winner overall of our 4 remaining contestants will be invited to the World Championship in Fischer Random, being held in Reykjavik, Iceland at the end of October. And they will be facing such superstars as the current champion, Wesley So, and the 2019 runner-up, Magnus Carlsen. But that is for the future. And now, for the present, we have the positions for this next round of games. And we can see that the rooks are both in their starting position. So when we have a new position, we got to take some time to try and figure out okay, what is going on? The rooks in their initial positions, as is the white king. So castling rules will be completely normal in this game. Nothing weird about the castling this time round. Rooks and king in normally situated. However, the bishops have both taken one step further to the side. In general, I feel like the bishops rather enjoy being on the side rather than being in the middle. We talked about this earlier, that a bishop in the middle will be pointing out towards the sides of the board, whereas a bishop on the side actually is pointing in towards these important central squares. And both players here, we see them prioritizing opening up for their bishops early on. What else is special about this situation? The queen is rather centrally placed. I don't see us facing any problems with that. And we're going to move from this initial start of the Naroditsky versus Navarra game, where both players are taking their sweet time initially, trying to figure out plans, being faced with a completely new coordination of the pieces. We're also going to drop by the other semifinal, which is Sarana against Bluebaum. And look at this. They have just started completely differently. And what is White's pawn doing? Black's pawn. What is that black pawn doing on h5? What is your justification for putting that pawn forward? Oh, I just realized this is a clever method for how to get the bishop into play. Sarana just wants to put his bishop up against the white bishop, making trades. along that diagonal, easing black's defensive task. Okay, interesting style of play. And we see that even though these two semi-final matches have started with the identical position, it's actually they've actually gone in very different directions. With In this game, we saw an early pawn advance in the center, offering a trade there. But the problem of making trades like these is that when you move your undefended piece up in the middle too early in the game, the opponent gets to develop their pieces while also pushing you back. And look at this. Sarana really liking this plan of pushing the pawn up along the side of the board. He's not done yet. He's just continuing up. And I gotta say, I'm starting to like this. Because in conjunction with the black bishop pointing down from its starting location, it feels like black has got something going on here. And Bluebaum, after playing the move e4, the eval bar just takes a dive. A big dive from the eval bar here. And now knight to f4 will punish white's play. Knight to f4 attacks the pawn on g2. And I was earlier, when we were discussing this initial position, I was saying, is there anything more important to notice that I've forgotten to talk about? And there certainly was. Because this situation, with knight f4 now being on the board, the pawn on g2 starts out undefended. One of the most important things you got to watch out for in Fischer Random Chess is whether or not one of your pawns are undefended from this initial position. And now here, that weakness is being immediately exploited by Sarana. Why are you not playing h3? How on earth is Sarana not continuing forward with his pawn along the side of the board? Didn't that make perfect sense to jump in with the knight, forcing the white king to move and lose the castling rights? Oh, I guess not. The king could just move to the side and there would be a trade. And in that situation, white would have really well placed pawns in the center in addition to having developed their pieces. Wow. Fischer Random Chess is such a tricky game because you think you understand what's going on, but without having seen any similar situations previously, it just really messes with a chess player's head. You really struggle to understand the positions like you would when you're playing positions you've studied for 15 years already. Okay, so Sarana is not jumping the gun, pushing the pawn up along the side. Instead, he's going to play his knight to g5. I'm really liking this plan. Sarana had it all under control. Knight to g5 next is going to be a killer move because the knight is going to be pointing in towards the pawn on f3, and then we're going to push this side pawn up the board. And here white would just be in so much trouble. That pressure against the pawn on g2, the pawn cannot move because then black's knights are just infiltrating with the check, here also having the double attack on the queen, and white's position is just completely collapsing. Wow, what a start to this game for Alexei Sarana. He made it through in spectacular fashion when he played against Donchenko in the quarterfinal. That final game saw both players having 2 queens, 4 queens in total. And Sarana was definitely in trouble at some point in that game. But here he is with the black pieces already after 8 moves, just causing all sorts of trouble. And I'm starting to think maybe this knight can just continue up the board in the middle. How about this knight just continues forward? Because it's really difficult for white to kick this knight away. If the queen moves to the side to try and attack black and force black back, then black has a great sacrifice with the knight giving itself away against the white pawn, because then the white pawn no longer defends its buddy on f3, allowing the other black knight to come in with that devastating double attack on both the king and on the queen. Wow. Knight to d4. I mean, normally we tell people that you shouldn't move the same piece more than once in the opening, but we may have to make an exception for these black knights. These black knights are just killing it right now, and just completely dominating the board, without white really being able to have a say in the matter. Incredible. Okay, we're gonna let Sarana think about this. I suspect that if he moves his knight up, that's going to be very, very advantageous for him, despite having the black pieces. We're going to go back to the other semifinal, and we're just going to catch Danya Naroditsky as he makes a breakthrough move in the middle of the board. Danya Naroditsky here in a position where no pieces have been traded. Danya challenges the black pawn with his pawn, but then after g6, there's an attack on the white knight, and if that white knight moves away, then black is ready to just capture the pawn in the center, winning a pawn and probably with it winning the game. So was this all part of Naroditsky's calculations? The computer is very negative to this way of playing. Danya continues with his pawn up in the center of the board. Navarra then captures the white knight. The idea clearly was that white would recapture this pawn, thereby having the bishop pointing in towards the black queen. And since the queen is lost, if the knight moves, the knight cannot move. And then this pawn will recapture the knight next. That was Naroditsky's intention. However, in practical play, the story is very, very different, because here Navarra can capture the pawn in the center, and when the white pawn recaptures, black can go with a bishop to a5, opening up out of the blue 2 pieces attacking in towards the white knight and attacking in towards the white king. And that is just a game winner right there and then. Okay, so after pawn takes knight, Danya has chosen to recapture with the bishop. I'm curious why Navarra is thinking right now, because pawn takes pawn just strikes me as such an easy move to find. Obviously, he's going to see that if there's an exchange here, if the pawn were to take back like we studied, then bishop f5 just ends the game right away, the knight not being able to get more defenders. So Danya has chosen instead to use his knight to recapture in the center. But then we're getting this situation where white has given away a full knight as a trade for a pawn. I don't think he did that on purpose. I think that was just a big, big blunder on Danya's part. That being said, black is definitely struggling to untangle this whole mess. and the white pieces are very well placed on squares where there are no black pawns that can chase them away. So I mean, a piece is a piece. So you would think black can go ahead and win this game. But Danya Naroditsky, he's a tricky player. And he does have some attacking chances here against Navarra. So I'm not ruling him out just yet. But I will say that not only is Naroditsky down a full piece for a pawn, he's also way down on the clock. 6 minutes. So Naroditsky has been playing slowly and I would say quite poorly. And I guess the fact that we cannot see anything of him but his hair seems to confirm that he's a bit slouched and concerned about what's currently going on in this game. So David Navarra potentially getting the win here from the first game of the semifinal with the black pieces. I'm not sure black and white matters as much in Fischer Random chess as it does in normal chess. But having the white pieces in the last round and potentially only needing a draw, that is very favorable for the Czech Grandmaster. We're going to go back to the other game. And here we have Sarana choosing not to bring his knight into the middle. So we were looking at this position last. We thought if the knight moves up, it would actually cause great distress for the white queen. Instead, Sarana moving his bishop up in the middle and then moving his queen up. But moving the queen to a place where it's voluntarily taking on the same diagonal as white's bishop, it feels a bit iffy. But his justification is that the white knight cannot move to attack for the bishop to attack the queen without the knight then also releasing the defense of the g2 pawn. So there are some reasonings for why this queen has placed itself on the same diagonal as the white bishop. But now it does seem as though Bluebaum, in a better way than previously, is able to get his pieces out a little bit. I would still like to see him make some trades. Maybe he should castle. Yeah, because this bishop is being blocked by its own pawn. And yes, at least white has the advantage of having these great pawns controlling in towards the center, whereas black has no pawns in the middle of the board controlling. But black is essentially saying that I don't need pawns to control because I have so much influence that I can just play with my pieces. And I mean, you gotta kind of agree. Like, look at how all of black's pieces are just centered around, especially this d4 square. The question is, can you use it for anything? And the answer is, I don't know. Okay, the queen trade. The queen trade doesn't strike me as the most ambitious plan for Sarana, but on the other hand, if a trade is made, the black knight would be able to get into a fantastic location, and the pressure on the bishop would force the bishop back, and then the bishop would be blocking the rook. So if there's a queen trade, you probably don't want to be the one to execute it. You don't want to be the one to allow the black knight getting into the center. So on Bluebaum's behalf, I'm going to suggest the move castles queenside. Just get the king out of the way. Most importantly, get the rook in towards the middle. Castling queenside feels like a solid move for white here, and it's also the move Bluebaum chooses to make. And as we were saying earlier, because the kings and rooks were in their normal chess positions, that means the castling rules are just completely normal. Nothing special about it at all. We're gonna take a little break from this game, and we're gonna jump back to the Navarra-Naroditsky game, which does feel like it might be decisive in someone's favor. Not ruling out Daniel Naroditsky just yet, but he is down a full piece. So black has a knight, white has a pawn. Normally, that is the kind of material advantage that renders a position hopeless. And this is a slight exception to that rule, because these black knights have not really been able to accomplish much, and the black king is still struggling to find long-term safety. The problem is just the fact that not only is Naroditsky down on material, he's also way down on time. And judging from the thinking on this decision, it doesn't seem as though he's comfortable with his position to start speeding up just yet. So Naroditsky's still taking a lot of time on his decisions, and now moving that rook to actually keep it placed way in the belly of the beast. That rook is staying inside black's half, which can be good. It can let the rook get into an attacking position. But right now, I'm thinking maybe I want to exploit that the rook is being so aggressive by just offering trades with it. Navarra not going for the trade, instead moving his knight over to attack the rook. The rook retreats immediately. Naroditsky clearly aware that he needs to speed up. He just needs to find the right moment to do so. And now white's knight is ready to go back into the center of the board. The white knight on d5 will be an absolute monster. The only concern in white's position is that the opponent has one more knight than you have. And so one very well-placed knight might be outmaneuvered by two decently placed black knights. Time will show. Navarra taking his time here, trying to figure out the best defensive plan. Navarra with his bishop pointing down towards white's king, but also pointing down towards potential trades with the white knight and bishop. It's got to be very tempting for Navarra at this stage to capture that white knight and thereby preventing it from making an entry into the middle of the board. Instead, Navarra choosing to move his queen up. Is he getting ready to castle? His king has still not moved, nor has his rook. Navarra is legally allowed to make this castling move next. The question is whether or not he really wants to, because I'm expecting the white knight to take a step forward in the center, and that's gonna potentially leave black's king exposed to some checks if the king chooses to castle. Okay, we're gonna test it out. The knight coming into the center. Navarra had the opportunity to capture the knight with his bishop earlier. He chose not to do it. And as a result, the white knight in the center has a magnificent posting. The question is, will the two black knights be able to neutralize the one very well placed one. I'm not certain. Rook c8, good move from Navarra, threatening queen takes b5, a tricky move. Speaking of tricky moves, Naroditsky, wow, coming up with his queen, and this queen is genuinely pointing in towards the black king, because now if Navarra captures the white pawn, which was obviously his plan, then Naroditsky will sacrifice his knight, have a double attack on black's knight and king. The knight will have to capture the white knight, but then the white rook can move. Honestly, not sure how this should move. I'm thinking here, because then the rook attacks the queen and the queen attacks the king. And this could be very favorable for white. So Naroditsky still creating traps in the position. He's down to just 1 minute 40 here. But Navarra struggling to figure out how to keep his king safe. Navarra has spent way more time in this phase. But, I didn't even realize the queen moving up had left the pawn on f5 undefended. Ooh, that's a big decision, giving up that pawn, because now the black knight gets into an incredible position. It's eyeing the square d4. If black just gets one more move, this is game over. Naroditsky with his knight attacking the queen. The queen does not have to move. Wow, Navarra does not move the queen. What a play from Navarra. He was scared about moving the queen because then white could make some sacrifices, opening up for the queen and rook to attack in towards the black king. That was a spectacular idea from Naroditsky yet again. Navarra sensing the danger, sensing that the opponent definitely wants me to capture this undefended pawn. He realizes that I don't even have to move my queen, even though it's under attack. He goes for the counterattack on white's queen, forcing the white queen to step away from that diagonal in towards the black king. And now the black queen can move away without danger. Well, there's some danger still. There's a lot of danger still, actually. If the queen steps back one, then the knight will just jump into the middle, attack the queen yet again. Wow! Rook takes g2! David Navarra sacrifices his rook. And while we were completely focused on the safety of black's king, David Navarra strikes back with a rook sacrifice while he has his queen pointed down towards the white king. And then the chess engines announce that it's checkmate in a minimum of 11 moves, not for Naroditsky, but for David Navarra. What a turnaround. The black queen and knight working together against the white king. Naroditsky defending as best he can here. There's no checkmate visible as of now. There seems to be something available. I'm seeing like a 5-move line in which black manages to capture this white rook. And if I'm seeing it, you can be certain that Navarra is seeing it, and he's about to win this semifinal game in style. He's about to go queen to e3. That queen is going to be attacking down towards the white king and towards the white rook. Navarra, he was up a piece, but now he gave away a rook. So right now, black has a knight and a pawn in exchange for a rook. But it doesn't matter because Navarra, he's just completely in control, using his queen to force the white king out into the danger zone. Naroditsky resigns because both players saw that after king g3, queen g2, king takes knight, the queen comes in for the final checkmate. And Navarra takes the lead in this first game. What a performance from him. We're going to jump over to the other ongoing semifinal between Alexei Sarana and Matthias Bluebaum. In this game, as the previous one, it is the black player with the advantage trying to go for the win. Sarana was very aggressive with his knights in the opening. Tons of things have changed while we were observing the attack Naroditsky had going on against Navarra. We're going to have to do a head count. And the head count actually says that both players have the same amount of pawns. I'm surprised because if you look on the left side on the eval bar, you will see that it's almost completely black. And that is despite white not even being down a pawn. And as far as I can tell, there's no way for black to win any of white's pawns anytime soon either. So this is just a complicated struggle where the computers happen to think that that black has the opportunities needed to win the game. But in a human matchup, which this is, and especially considering the fact that both players are down to under 1 minute on the clock, the situation can unfold so much differently. That being said, Sarana just managed to get his knight attacking both the king and the pawn. Sarana picks up that extra pawn. That's an important one. It's always nice to have an extra pawn in the bank. The question now is, where's this knight moving? The knight has only one available square, and that square is right into white's position next to the white king, with the white pawns completely surrounding the knight. But it's okay. As far as I can tell, there's no way of trapping the knight here because the knight is putting an attack on the white rook. And when the white rook moves away, the knight can also move and find this very nice location on D3. What a game. What a game. The trade in the middle. Oh, and then there's the double attack. White's knight also coming in with those double attack ideas, attacking both the rook and the black pawn. The rook moves targeting a white pawn, so where a lot of pawns are being exchanged off the board now. Wow, Bluebaum also getting a pawn, another one, with his knight running around chasing the black pawns. However, this latest attempt from Bluebaum to capture the black pawn was in fact a major mistake, because while the black knight had a way to get away from the white attack, now this white knight is struggling getting back into the game. So still equal material, but the most important factor right now is that this black pawn has only 3 steps away from becoming a new queen. And in the meantime, white's rook and knight are kind of busy doing nothing on the opposite side. And here Sarana is coming with his rooks. These rooks are going to be used to attack along the side of the board. Checks against the black king. The king manages to run away, but now there's a sacrifice. White needs to sacrifice on that knight, because now the knight is no longer controlling the square b4, so that the white king has a way to escape. The big question now is whether or not this pawn will become a new queen, and that's not clear at all, because white also has a pawn that's trying to get up and become a new queen. And the white knight also now a contributor in defense. Both players less than 10 seconds on the clock. Both players pushing their pawns forward, trying to get new queens. Blue Baum does allow the black piece to become a new queen, and then Sarana manages to get his rook into defense just in time. And Sarana is going to win this game. He just made it. The rook comes back, stops the pawn in time, and the pawn is lost, and with it the game. And Sarana takes that all-important first victory, now showcasing the power of the rooks to checkmate the lone king. Blue Baum resigns, and that means in both first games of these semifinals, the white player took home the first victory. Sarana and Blue Baum then starts their game number 2. It's the same starting position as we had in game number 1, but we're not going to be checking in on these guys as they start their game. We're going to be looking at what happened between Navarra and Naroditsky while Blue Baum and Sarana was fighting out their time scramble. And I gotta say, things are happening. Wow. Things are definitely happening in this game. Wow. Okay. So black has a bishop centrally placed in the center of the board. There were also some very complicated trades. I remember okay, so Navarra was very aggressive with his pawns from the beginning, and then Naroditsky started making trading operations. And Navarra, only needing a draw in this game, he said, okay, I'll trade as much as you'd like. But I'm not sure that was really the right call for Navarra, because right now it feels as though these black bishops have gotten rather good positions. On the other hand, black has these doubled pawns, which is going to be a long-term weakness. And also this pawn on d7, that's a problem for black, because this is what we call a backward pawn. It means that the c pawn has kind of ran so far forward that this d pawn, even though it has a pawn next to it, it's running so far behind its side buddy that it's basically has all the characteristics of an isolated pawn. So that's what we call a backward pawn, and it cannot be defended by other pawns at this instance unless it makes it all the way up to d3. In which case, if it manages to go way up there, black is definitely going to win the game. So actually, the more I look at it, the more I'm liking Navarra's position after all. I think this strategic element with the black d pawn kind of lagging behind its buddy, I think that may be more important than I initially thought. And Navarra here has a very simple plan. He's just going to move his bishop out, and then he's going to castle. So white is also going to get the king to safety way before Naroditsky. Okay, so here we see the knights getting involved early on. That reminds me of the first game between Blue Baum and Sarana, where that also happened. And speaking of the knights getting involved early, we're going to take a look at that other matchup where, shockingly, even though they started like 6 minutes after Navarra and Naroditsky, this game has progressed so much further. And that is definitely not a good thing for the German player, because when I say progressed, I mean pieces have just disappeared off the board. Bluebound with his queen attacking white's king, going for the early queen trade. But like black needs to win this game. And yet 2 pawns and a queen has been traded off early on. And that is very, very good news for Sarana. And it does feel as though this position is rather equal, and that Sarana will probably make it into the big final. And I want to remind everyone that these Fischer Random qualifiers, they will continue tomorrow. So right now we've had the quarterfinal. We're currently watching the semifinal. But even though we started out with 8 players, we're trying to take it down to just 1 remaining. And in order to do that, we're going to have a 4-game final tomorrow at the same starting time as today, which is 5 a.m. Pacific. So I'm going to say that this Sarana Bluebound game number 2, rather boring, with the queens having been exchanged off. So we're going to return to where the action is, and that is between Naroditsky and Navarra, because here the kings have chosen to go on opposite sides of the board. That's often an indicator that we're going to have some fun attacking chess. It enables both players to be aggressive with their pawns towards the opponent's king. And I spy in the future this white pawn making its way up the board. White essentially here wants to just take this pawn off the board. We just want it to go away because we want the rook to have an open file pointing down towards the black king. Now, Fischer Random Chess has some special rules, but those rules do not include that you can use a move to just get rid of one of your own pieces that's standing in the way. So if Navarra wants to open up for his rook, he first needs to push this pawn up and get rid of it. And that's going to take some time. So in the meantime, you would think Naroditsky is going to do some of the same stuff, pushing his pawns up on the opposite flank. But an exciting game for sure. I'm liking Navarro's chances. I'm particularly liking the square d5. I think this square is going to be amazing for white's knight in the future. Right now, black has very good control, but Navarra at some point will play g3, chase the knight back, and then white's knight will make it to the d5 square. And Naroditsky, wow. Naroditsky actually pushing his pawn to that square where I was saying white is going to take control there. And it's a pawn sacrifice. So Navarra immediately attacking the black knight. And Naroditsky knows that if he moves his knight away, he's just going to lose the pawn in the middle of the board. And this knight is also going to be a nightmare to deal with. No pun intended, actually, but it was a happy accident. So instead, Naroditsky takes that knight forward to give a check on white's king. The knight is captured. Trades are made. White now up a pawn. But the reasoning for Naroditsky to go into this is that he's now sacrificing another pawn to open up for his bishops. So that was just a temporary sacrifice, the last one. White now with an extra pawn. But compared to earlier, the black queen has now gotten opened up its potential down towards the white king. There's a black bishop very close to the king as well. And the black bishop has eliminated one of the pawns that was defending. So that's a bit of a success. And in addition, the black rook currently pointing down on the f3 pawn and could potentially capture that one. So overall, I must say I really like this pawn sacrifice from Naroditsky. I think for a person who needs to win this game, that was absolutely the right decision to make. And Navarra now struggling with how he's going to get his bishop involved in the game. And I guess he kind of figured it out there. Because after the knight has moved forward in the center, the knight was threatening knight to e7, attacking both the queen and the king. To stop that, Naroditsky played rook e8, and then bishop e3 now. I'm expecting from Navarra, trying to just get that bishop, try and get a trade with the black bishop. And the computer is saying that was a decisive mistake. The computer is saying that was a horrible mistake from Navarra, but it was literally the move I was suggesting. How can Danya punish this? Oh my gosh! The queen is coming in, and Danya, look at him celebrating. He takes a step away from his seat. He's so happy now to have gotten this queen involved in the attack. He actually needed to go for a walk to calm himself down. He realizes that he has just equalized this match. He's gonna take this into another tiebreaker. We're gonna get another Armageddon game featuring Danya Naroditsky for the second time in a row. And having had the experience from the quarterfinal, I'm going to say he's going to be an even bigger favorite in this semifinal. And Navarra, poor guy, realizing what he has done, realizing that it's very difficult to prevent this black queen from entering in towards that area close to the white king. Yeah, there's just nothing Navarra can do. There's nothing. It's game over instantly. If Navarra tries to come with his rook in towards the center to protect the bishop, then the queen just comes in and delivers a checkmating attack on that white king. And Navarra instead, he tries to go c4. Ah, clever. Okay, that was a good attempt from Navarra. Navarra tries to defend his own knight and also kind of block the black bishop from being able to capture the knight. The problem is just the fact that the bishop is now entering the attack as well. And how is this not game over? Why is the computer saying that this is, well, not okay for white, but not instantly losing? I guess Navarra can now play queen to d3, and he avoids any immediate checkmate problems. Yes. So queen to d3, white stays in the game, but Naroditsky now looking good to getting this into a 1-1 scoreline, which will demand a tiebreak game to decide it. And speaking of tiebreak games needed, what happened to Sarana? Look at this, and look at, we just joined as Bluebaum put in the coffin in white's position. Bishop takes on a4. Sarana was thinking, well, that pawn is defended. I got my rook, I got my king helping out over here. But when the white rook now captures the black bishop, Black will recapture. The king will come out, and temporarily, white will be up by a whole bishop. But it's very temporary because the knight coming in, the fork on the king and on the rook. That's a game winner. That's a game winner right there from Bluebaum. And that means they're going to Armageddon as well. Both semifinals getting a decisive result in the first game. And now, with their backs against the wall, both Matthias Bluebaum and Daniel Naroditsky is looking like they're going to strike back with the black pieces to equalize the match. And if that happens, if both of these matches goes to the tie breaks, we will have seen a total of 4 out of 4 wins with the black pieces. Wow. And look at Sarana's frustration. He knew that after that first game, he was looking so good. He knew he only needed to make a draw with the white pieces. And we were saying out of the opening that it was a big success that white had managed to get a very calm, easy to play position. But right now, he's basically just going through in his head what he did wrong. Because Sarana knows there's absolutely no hope that he survives this situation. Sarana is going down. And he actually, wow. Sarana spent 7 minutes and 46 seconds on that move. Man, he must have had some connectivity problems as well. But yeah, what a situation. And Sarana now trying to create some trickery to kind of save himself. And frankly, he's not doing a bad job of it. Wow, okay, bishop coming in to attack the rook. This is very clever, because if that rook moves, that means the white rook can escape the fork by going up, giving a check. And when the king moves, then you can capture the rook on the side. Ooh, very clever from Sarana. So he's still trying to hold on. He's still grasping at some of those straws on how to survive. Instead, Bluebaum gives a check with his rook. The white king moves up. The white king is putting pressure on the knight. And if the knight moves, then the rook is in trouble. How do you get out of this situation? Ah, yes. Check and then check. Yes, you force the white king away from the knight. And then you're okay. Because now rook to b8 is okay. Even though white now moves the king further forward, attacks the rook can just sacrifice itself on the bishop. And then you just push this pawn on the side. And because the white king went on a bit of a journey, I think is fair to say, there's just not enough pieces left to stop the black pawn making its way forward along the edge. So yeah, Bluebaum is gonna win this, and he's gonna equalize the match. And we're gonna go take a look at our other semifinal, where David Navarra has lost his queen. That being said, he does have an awful lot of pieces in exchange for the queen. So there's a knight, a bishop, and a rook for a queen and 2 pawns. And I think the crucial part of that sentence is the 2 pawns. I think without the pawns being able to kind of make their way up and become a new queen, Black would not be able to win this. But in this situation, as it stands, I think having the pawns is very crucial because they can just make their way up the board, start attacking White's pieces, forcing the pieces out of their defensive positions. And also, as the pawns progress, they can even become queens in the end. So, yeah, it's looking like Daniel Naroditsky will equalize the match in the last moment. But he's spending quite a lot of time here. And Danya is down to just 2 minutes on the clock, which clearly seems to indicate that he's not entirely convinced how he's going to win this position. He's moving his queen over. The queen now attacking the knight, attacking the king. The white king about to take a little journey. That seems to be the common thread in these 2 semifinals right now. The white king very poorly defended. It's about to make its way further up the board. And Naroditsky, wow, Naroditsky is really thinking still. He's not finding a plan he's happy with. And I remember, everyone, that you only get 2 additional seconds per move you make. And now Naroditsky has been spending a lot of time. He spent 2.5 minutes for the last 3 moves. And if anything, the position has just become more difficult in the meantime, with the computer engines now saying that that white can actually save themselves with correct play. And Danya is still thinking he's gonna mess this up. Danya Naroditsky, the speed monster who got this incredible attack going on against the white king, he's not finding a solution he's happy with. And we saw earlier that he needed to take a walk. That was how excited he was about getting his queen involved in the attack. Now he's losing his pawn. This pawn is being lost. The rook can come and attack the pawn. That is a big blunder. Surely. Oh no, it's a brilliant move. No, if rook b1, then rook takes d4. And then king takes, queen check, attack the king, attack the knight. But the king can move up and capture one of these pawns. And then the computer is saying this is a draw. Wow. Let's see if this happens. After b5, Navarra finds it. Navarra finds the move. He does play rook to b1. He allows the sacrifice of the rook against the bishop. And now Naroditsky is down to just 40 seconds. And he needs to make a difficult call on whether or not he wants to give up his rook in this instance. And Naroditsky chooses not to do so. But now the white rook can capture this dangerous black pawn. Surely that is the right idea. Navarra with 3 minutes on the clock. Naroditsky 30 seconds. Navarra calculating because he knows that he just needs to be very, very attentive to his own king safety at this point. He chooses to capture with a knight. I don't really understand that, but it's okay. That's why these players are playing and not me. The knight is immediately attacked. You would think the knight needs to go back. Why has the knight not gone back? Yes, it has. Naroditsky now captures another pawn. What a tricky position. Black is now suffering because these pawns are doubled. It would be much easier for black to get a new queen if these pawns could defend each other as they progressed down the board. But because these guys are on the same file, it means that they can never get into a situation where one is protecting the other. And that may be a major drawback for black's situation. On the other hand, you would think that with the king stuck in the middle, you would think that Navarra loses this somehow. What a game this is going to be. And in other news, we do have a result in the other semi-final, and it is an equal score. So no matter the result in this game, there will be an Armageddon, because Matthias Bluebaum has managed to beat Alexei Sarana to equalize the match and get the 1-1 score Bluebaum needed there. So there will be an Armageddon. The question is, will there be one or will there be two? And to be honest, I mean, in practical play, with the white king so exposed and the queen giving checks all the time, I find it very difficult to believe that Navarra is going to save this. But on the other hand, Naroditsky down to just 18 seconds. So it's not like he's getting the luxury of thinking a lot about his moves either. I would think rook to a3 here. I would just try to go after this pawn as soon as possible. Navarra instead trying to go on a counterattack using the fact that his bishop is pointing in towards the pawn in front of black's king. Now, that counterattacking plan was just simply prevented by Naroditsky. And then we need a different plan. And that's the problem. Navarra always needing to reset, find new ideas, figure out how to keep his king safe. And it was fine as long as he had 3 minutes on the clock. It's less fine now that he has 30 seconds. And Danya Naroditsky is going to win this. That is my prediction. Navarra spending so much time for every single one of his moves, but that time is about to run out. He's down to 20 seconds on the clock now. They're only getting another 2 seconds per move they make. So it's very difficult for Navarra to keep the pace up with his king being so poorly defended as it is. Navarra here, why is he not giving a check with the rook? Navarra, yeah, I'm not understanding what's going on. The eval bar moved, something happened, not sure what. The game continues. Both players, 10 seconds left. Are there any sacrifices? The pawn can step one further. But look at this. Navarra now will get the trade of rooks. Navarra sending his rook into the attack. But then what? He has 10 seconds to figure it out. He does make the trade of rooks, but what about this pawn? This pawn is now very close to just going in, becoming a new queen. The white rook, okay, you can give some checks. You can maybe put the rook back into defense. Okay, no, the rook instead going after one of these pawns. Also going after the other pawn. Yeah, Naroditsky losing his pawns here. That's not good. The bishop getting a really nice location in the center of the board. Now the king trying to take out the pawn on g3. And Naroditsky allows it. Naroditsky allows the pawn to be captured. And now just bishop to a protected square. Navarra is gonna win this. Navarra has one pawn. The last pawn is under control. The bishop is doing a great job of defending there. Naroditsky shaking his head. He has allowed Navarra to escape from this situation. Even if Naroditsky gets a new queen now, there will be a rook and knight versus queen situation. There's absolutely no hope that you can win with just a queen against a rook and a knight. They're working together too well. Wow, why are you moving that rook? Navarra's stressing me out here. But he does have everything defended. The rook is defended. The bishop is pointing down, stopping the pawn. Ooh, but we did allow that king to get very high up the board now. I don't think it makes a difference, but it makes me nervous. The rook up. Yeah, Navarra now planning to give checks from b7. That request was denied. The king now should probably, just stay close to the bishop. Make sure that the king is not blocking the bishop's path down the board. How is rook e7? Then no, rook e7. Then black would sacrifice the queen, and then it would be bishop and knight versus queen, which actually is possible to win. So Navarra just needs to make sure that his rook is protected. He's going back and forth with his rook. He does seem to feel like, oh, that's a risky placement for that rook. If the queen comes down here, that rook is being captured. Now the rook... No, the rook just giving checks from the side. Now what? Now what? Yes, move the rook to a defended location. That's good. The queen giving a check. That's fine. Just move the king away. Keep the king close to your bishop. Yes, this bishop is just holding everything together. Watch out for the pin. Watch out for the pin. Yes, move the away. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, this is all good. We're closing in on the 50 move rule. So if no pieces have been captured and no pawns have moved, if you do that for 50 moves, then you're allowed to claim a draw, because you just say the opponent hasn't been able to show any progress being made. And the last move was pawn to a2, which was move 60 something. So Navarra just has to survive the next 10 moves before he can claim a draw. Oh, but now he cannot claim a draw. However, now that he no longer has to take care of his bishop, having to always watch out for black not getting a new queen in an opportune way, this is completely under control for Navarra. Navarra can just make sure that his king is protecting the knight and the knight is protecting the rook. As long as the rook now just moves between locations where the knight is protecting, the queen cannot force the king away from defending the knight, and this is going to be a draw. David Navarra makes it to the final of this Fischer Random World Championship qualifier, and in that final, he will be facing either Matthias Bluebaum of Germany or Alexei Sarana, because those two players have played 1-1 in their semifinal match, and they are going to go into the Armageddon tiebreaker. So while we're watching, it's a draw by repetition, and Navarra to the final, Naroditsky is out. And before we take a quick break here, we want to remind everyone that we've made a new video that we're quite proud of. It is the biggest chess prize winners ever. Have you ever wondered how much money the biggest names in chess, like Carlsen, Anand, and Kasparov, have taken home? We've crunched the numbers and published a full inflation-adjusted analysis for championships, super tournaments, money matches, and more. Type !! prize winners in the chat to get the link to the video. We're back with the Fischer Random World Chess Championship qualifier. I'm Jon Ludwig Hammer, and we have one game remaining. This is the final one for today, and we're trying to figure out who gets into the final to be played tomorrow. And the competitors we have Matthias Bluebaum of Germany, and we have Alexei Sarana also competing. And we have had a bidding to decide who gets the black pieces. So this is the tiebreaker format known as an Armageddon game within chess circles. The big feature of this format is that if black wins in case of a draw. But the players are also bidding to decide who wants the black pieces the most. So the less time you bid, then you get to decide which color you have. And the bid from Matthias Bluebaum was 11 minutes and 25 seconds. And that is why Sarana here, as the game starts, has a big time advantage. Bluebaum then having the advantage of making it through to the next stage in case of a draw. And in these semifinals, we have had 4 wins for black. We have had 0 draws. Oh, no, actually, we did have one. Sorry. What's up with my memory? We did have a draw. It probably shouldn't have been a draw. But Danya Nereditsky in that final game had chances to get an Armageddon match as well. But that game ended in a draw. So we have had 3 wins for black, 1 draw. But crucially, and that was my point, we haven't seen a single win for the white pieces from this position. So yeah, there's something to be concerned about if you're Alexei Sarana. The opening has been incredibly interesting. So white here from the start has pushed the pawns aggressively in the center. First 1 pawn 2 steps forward, and then another pawn 2 steps forward afterwards. That has just resulted in a very interesting position. I'm sorry, my relay system is completely bugged, so I'm trying to fix that on my end. And then we'll be back to the games, hopefully. Okay, so white being very aggressive with these pawns in the center. And then black prioritizing the bishops, opening up for the bishops to point in towards the center. Bluebaum then developing his knight. The white knight also getting involved. White definitely has a space advantage here. With the pawns being more aggressively placed than their black counterparts. And even so, the eval bar on the left-hand side seems to suggest that it's a pretty equal position. Normally, you would think one player is very favored, having such a strong grip on the central squares. But for some reason here, initially, the computer was like, oh no, this is an interesting strategy from black. But I'm noticing now that it is jumping up in Sarana's favor in some instances. And I must say, from a human perspective, I'm definitely liking White's position more. And right now, castling from Sarana. Honestly, queen forward, bishop forward, and castling in the opposite direction was a very interesting possibility White had there. Instead, Sarana decides to play it safe. He puts the king on the same side as the black king. And White's strategy will now be very closely linked with the fate of this black D pawn, because this pawn is struggling to make its way up the board. There's simply too much pressure from these white pawns for black to make it up there. And so this pawn on d7 will be a continuous weakness in black's camp. I'm really liking what Sarana is doing here. He's getting his knight up into a great position. And then afterwards, he's also building up with his pawns, ready to dislodge this well-placed bishop in the center of the board. And we're going to take a quick analysis variation here. What happens if the pawn continues further forward, attacks the bishop? We would then see a trade of those bishops. And if the black knight then were to try and target the pawn on e4, then white would win the game with a tremendous sacrifice, eliminating the pawn in front of black's king. And then the next knight will come in, force the king back, and the queen with the finish coming in, working together with the knight. So honestly, that was a big missed opportunity for Sarana. So he would have played this move f4 if not for the fact that he was concerned about the safety of the e4 pawn afterwards. But as we demonstrated, there was no need to be concerned. There was a sacrifice white had available. Instead, Sarana moving his queen up, then the bishop, now the rook next. Very solid play from white. And essentially what white is saying here is that I don't want to calculate. I don't want to have to consider, maybe this is good if I understand I have a sacrifice. No, Sarana is such a fan of his own position that he's saying, I don't want to calculate anything. I'm just going to put my pieces on good squares. And after I have improved all my pieces, then I'll start thinking about next steps and how to make the breakthrough. So this position we had, all of white's pieces were undeveloped, and now they're just making their way into the game with the rook joining next. And before the rook joins, Bluebaum decides that he wants a trade of bishops. I assume the reasoning is that he also wants a trade of queens. The problem is, if the queen comes up, it would leave the d6 square poorly defended. So Bluebaum instead decides for a more passive solution, where he just says, okay, I'm just going to sit here with my pawns. Yes, they're not very aggressive, but they're doing a good job of controlling these squares in front of the pawns, making it very, very difficult for white to break through. And speaking of difficult to break through, this knight is rather annoying. I'm predicting that Bluebaum now just comes in with his bishop to take that knight out immediately before it causes any more damage. So Bluebaum getting the advantage of having the, advantage. I guess that can be discussed. But getting the advantage of draw odds. He chose to have 3 minutes and 35 seconds less on the clock when the game started. And that time difference has just increased. The time difference is now up to 5 minutes as Black's queen, a very strange decision here by Bluebaum. He moves his queen to attack the white king. The white king easily gets out of the check, but as a result of this, the black queen has now abandoned the protection of the d6 pawn, and the white knight and rook was in a position to attack there. Okay, we now understand more about why Bluebaum did what he did. He was so unhappy with that pawn. He just decided, I'm going to give it away. So he sacrifices the pawn in the center. White now with an extra pawn. And that pawn is making its way further up the board. There's no other way of saving it. I don't know why Sarana is thinking. I guess it's because he was a bit surprised by Bluebaum's choice, but there's nothing to fear. Just keep the pawn moving forward, and that pawn is going to take you to the promised land, which today is the final of this Fischer Random World Championship qualifier. And Sarana does make that advance. The knight comes into the center. And, well, that knight is being captured. That's for sure. That knight is not going to survive much longer. White here should capture it with their rook. The black bishop will then capture the white rook. But then the knight comes in. An attack on the king, an attack on the bishop. The double attack will regain the material given away and secure white the victory. So, is there anything to be afraid of? I guess that's what Sarana is thinking about right now. If he does capture in the middle, that does allow the black rook to come up and attack the white king, which is why Sarana chooses not to capture the knight in the center. Okay. He still had 9 minutes on the clock. I really dislike this from Sarana. Terrible decision. He could have gotten a big advantage here by capturing the knight in the center and going into those complications. He could have spent another 3-4 minutes on that decision and he still would have been up on time. Instead, he chooses to move his queen, and now he gets hit by the knight being attacked by the white pawn. Ooh, that's clever. I thought the knight needed to move away, and when the knight moves away, yes, it does capture a bishop, but then the black knight will infiltrate, coming into this e3 square, attacking both the king and the rook and the bishop, and like attacking so many things that black is doing very good in that situation. Instead, Sarana probably had calculated this ahead of time, and he saw that if his knight is being evicted by the pawn, then the white bishop can come and do a counter pressure on the black knight. But now this game is really heating up because Matthias Bluebaum, he goes rook e3. Oh my gosh. So he's putting his rook on a square that's protected by a knight that's being attacked by a pawn. So instead of capturing the knight that was under attack, Bluebaum chooses to put his rook on a square where it can be captured by said knight. But it's actually very clever, because if that rook is captured, the knight comes in and gets the double attack on the king and on the rook. What a defense. What a play from Matthias Bluebaum. But that has cost him a lot of time. And Bluebaum now down to just 4 minutes on the clock. Sarana has 8 minutes to figure out how to deal with these new complications. Calculations will need to be made. And at the end of it, there's still a fair likelihood that white will remain up a pawn. And that's not any pawn. It's the pawn on d6 that has some protection from the white queen and rook. And Sarana does make the decision. He does capture the rook, allowing the black knight to come into the position, give a check on the white king. But the white king just calmly steps into the same diagonal as the black queen, because Sarana has understood that there are no ways for the black knight to move that causes such big problems that it needs to be avoided. So instead, I'm assuming this knight is going to capture the rook. Okay, instead, capture the bishops first. That's fine. I guess now you have to capture the rook. And after all of these trades, after what was a very fierce struggle between the pieces, so many captures in unorthodox fashions, white is going to end up being having that extra pawn. And now queen to c4. Queen to c4 is a endgame. Is it an endgame white wants? I'm going to say no. White generally does not want to trade the queens here. And that's because when the queens are traded, the black king can come closer to that white pawn and attack it. But right now, if the king steps too close to the pawn now, then the white queen will just attack the king and win the game with that. So it's very important for white that you want to keep both the queen and the rook on the board. You want to make black's life difficult. And this is very well illustrated by the fact that when Sarana gave an opportunity for Bluebaum to try and make a trade, that was just declined instantly. And now we have a big moment again. Rook to e2 potentially decides the game right here and now. Rook to e2 needs to be calculated by Alexei Sarana. It could be the final difficult move of the game. We need to analyze what happens. Rook to e2, the pawn will be captured. The queen will come up, say check. King will run away. The queen will check. The rook will come up as well. The queen will come in. The king will go on quite the journey. And in the end, we can conclude that this black king is getting checkmated in this variation. So rook e2 is a good move, and it has been played by Alexei Sarana. Matthias Bluebaum, realizing the problem, he just moves his king away immediately. But now queen to e8, that has to be the correct move, right? Maybe not. If queen to e8, then queen to f7. The queen gets back into defense, and the engine's now saying that this situation is a draw with correct play from both sides. Queen to e8, such a natural move, trying to invade, trying to punish the black king. Wow, the computer eval just changes completely and saying now that black can survive this situation. Bluebaum getting his queen back into defense. He only has 2 minutes left, and there are no increments in Armageddon. They will not be getting extra time per move is being made. When Bluebaum has 2 minutes left on the clock, that's it. That's all the time he gets. But now, on the other hand, he does have the chess engine's approval in that he's about to make a draw in this game, and he knows that he needs to speed up. He realizes that he has a chance to escape what has been a pretty bad game for him thus far. He got one opportunity and he's taking it, and he realizes the importance of keeping the pace here. And yeah, Bluebaum making a late comeback. He might survive this. And now Sarana with 4 minutes left. I mean, he cannot believe his eyes. Surely he was expecting this to be pretty easy at this point. But chess never is. Okay, I'm taking a look at the players' reactions. They're seeming very calm, the both of them. Sarana slowly realizing how much problems he created for himself and how he's actually no longer winning, despite being up a pawn, despite having what looked like a promising attack towards that black king. Wow. I mean, if Sarana could see the computer evaluation, I'm not sure he would believe it. He spent over a minute on thinking on this move now. So I think it has dawned on him that this is not easy. But for him to realize that completely all of his advantage has disappeared, that is such a difficult thing to think, because he only made one mistake. He made one bad move. And suddenly that was enough to just ruin everything. And Sarana's face not giving us any hints, but we are getting some hints from his time usage. He has now spent 2 minutes. For the first time in this game, he's going to be lower on time than his opponent. And he does return with the queen where he came from. He goes back and forth once, repeating the position, then using his king to protect the rook. Bluebaum very clearly was intending to use his queen to start capturing pawns. Instead, wow, this is clever from Bluebaum. Oh, that is so clever. He uses his queen to attack both the pawn. Oh, now it's a repetition. It's a repetition. Bluebaum is in the final. Sarana forgot that he went back and forth one extra time. So when the position repeated, it was actually for the third time. But Sarana, poor guy. I mean, he doesn't realize it now, but he had already spoiled his position. There was no way to find the win there, and Bluebaum using his queen very nicely to put the pressure on the white rook, and thereby never leaving the white king on its own. And that means the results are updated. Bluebaum wins in Armageddon. He is through to the final starting tomorrow at 5 a.m. Pacific. That's 2 p.m. Central European time. And he will be facing fellow European David Navarra, who was very convincing in his play today and managed to beat Naroditsky in the semi-final. So we're going to take a look at the schedule for this qualifier because we're not done yet. We have only reduced ourselves to 2 remaining players. And that means tomorrow we will have the final, and the final will have 4 games. 2 games with black, 2 games with white. And in that final, we will have Matthias Bluebaum of Germany, and we will have David Navarra of the Czech Republic. What a finish there. What a disappointment for Sarana. He made one bad move, and that was it. One bad move, and he lost his opportunity to fight for the Fischer Random World Championship title. Yeah, that is rough. But we do want to remind everyone that there's not only the Fischer Random Chess Championship qualifier coming up on chess.com, there's also the chess.com Global Championship Finals. And the finals will be happening live in Toronto, Ontario, starting November 2nd. So already now it's time to mark your calendars because there's $1 million at stake. The greatest players of chess, including a few former world champions, will be fighting for their share of a $1 million prize fund. And if you want more information on this event, type !CGC in chat. With that, we're just gonna quickly, before closing out for today, we're gonna take a look at the final brackets. David Navarra and Matthias Bluebaum will be fighting it out in the final. That will happen tomorrow. I will be there. Danya Naroditsky will be joining me, and we're really looking forward to it. So mark your calendars in the long run and in the short run, and I will see you all back tomorrow.